The turret stopped moving at the worst possible moment. It was just after first light, February 18th, 1945, somewhere along the Oder River approaches in eastern Germany. The ground was hard with frost, the kind that cracks under weight and turns every movement into a sound. A thin layer of mist hovered low over the fields, broken only by burnt-out vehicles and shattered tree lines. Inside a German Tiger one, the crew felt it before they fully understood it. The rotation slowed, then hesitated, then locked. Metal grinding against metal.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
A sound that did not belong in a battle where seconds decided everything. The gunner tried again, forcing the handwheel harder. Nothing. The turret was jammed, and somewhere beyond that pale mist, something heavier was already lining up its shot. You can almost feel the tension in that moment, the kind that presses into your chest, because this is not a long-range duel. This is close, too close, the kind of range where armor thickness and gun size are no longer numbers on paper. They are life or death, measured in seconds. Inside the Tiger, Oberfeldwebel Hans Keller leaned forward, eyes locked through the optics. He could not turn the turret. He could not reposition fast enough. And ahead, just barely visible through drifting fog, a massive silhouette was emerging. Low, wide, and unmistakable. An IS-2. The war had changed by this point. What German crews once believed about Soviet armor no longer held true. Early in the war, the Tiger one had been nearly untouchable. Its 88mm gun could destroy most enemy tanks long before they got close. Its thick armor made it a moving fortress. Crews trusted it. They relied on distance, on precision, on the idea that they would always fire first. But by 1945, that certainty had started to crack. The Soviet IS-2 was not just another tank. It was designed for this moment, built to break through heavy defenses, built to survive hits that would cripple other vehicles. And most importantly, it carried a 122mm gun, a weapon that did not need perfect conditions to be deadly. At close range, it was devastating. Inside the Tiger, the crew worked fast, but not fast enough. The driver, Gefreiter Otto Weiss, tried to angle the hull, hoping to compensate for the turret failure. It was a trained response. If the turret cannot move, move the tank. But the ground was uneven, frozen, and broken by shell craters. The Tiger was heavy, over 50 tons. It did not pivot quickly. Every second lost felt heavier than the steel around them. Hans Keller knew the danger. He had heard reports. IS-2s appearing more often, their shells punching through armor that was once considered safe. Crews destroyed before they even had a chance to react. And now, one was directly ahead. The gunner kept trying to force the turret. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. The loader stood ready, a round already prepared, waiting for an order that could not come. The commander scanned through his periscope, trying to judge distance, angle, movement. But all of that meant nothing if they could not bring the gun to bear. And then the IS-2 moved again. It came forward through the mist, its shape becoming clearer. Thick frontal armor, large turret, the long barrel of its 122mm gun already adjusting. Unlike the Tiger, its turret moved smoothly, deliberately. There was no panic in its motion, only purpose. You can almost feel the shift in control at that moment. For years, German crews had dominated engagements like this. They had been the hunters. Now, in this frozen field, roles were reversing. The Soviet crew inside the IS-2 had likely spotted the Tiger first. They would have recognized the silhouette immediately. The Tiger was famous, feared, but also known for its strengths and its weaknesses. And one of those weaknesses was happening right now, in real time, a mechanical failure. The Tiger's turret drive system, while powerful, was not perfect. It relied on complex mechanisms that could fail under stress, damage, or wear. In prolonged combat, especially in harsh conditions like this, even small issues could become critical. And when they did, they turned one of the most powerful tanks in the war into something vulnerable. Hans Keller made a decision. He shouted for the driver to keep turning the hull. Slowly, painfully, the Tiger began to pivot, tracks grinding against frozen earth. The entire tank trying to compensate for a turret that refused to move. The gun began to shift, inch by inch, toward the threat. But the IS-2 was already ahead. Inside the Soviet tank, the crew worked with practiced coordination. The 122-millimeter gun required separate loading. Shell and propellant loaded in sequence. It was slower than the Tiger's gun. But at this distance, speed was less important than timing, and they had the advantage. The Soviet gunner adjusted his aim. The commander gave the final correction. The loader slammed the heavy shell into place. The breech closed with a solid final sound. You can almost hear the silence that follows, that brief pause where everything seems to stop. Inside the Tiger, the gun was almost on target. Almost. The gunner could see the IS-2 now, clear enough to fire. But the alignment was not perfect. Not yet. And then the IS-2 fired first. The blast was overwhelming, a deep, heavy shock wave that tore through the cold air. The 122-millimeter shell crossed the short distance in an instant. There was no time to react, no time to adjust. It struck the Tiger's frontal armor with massive force. The impact was violent, not just a hit, but a crushing blow, the kind that shakes the entire vehicle. Inside, the crew felt it like a hammer hitting the world around them. The armor held for a fraction of a second, then failed. The shell penetrated, sending fragments and shock through the interior. In battles like this, outcomes are decided in moments like that, not by long exchanges, not by tactics over time, but by who fires first when it matters most. The Tiger had lost that moment. But to understand how it reached this point, you have to look beyond this single encounter. You have to go back to how these machines were built, how they were used, and how the war itself had changed around them. The Tiger I entered service in 1942 as a response to Soviet armor like the T-34 and KV-1. It was designed to dominate. Thick armor, powerful gun, precision optics, German engineering at its peak. Crews trained extensively to use its strengths. They engaged at long range. They avoided unnecessary risks. And when used correctly, the Tiger was incredibly effective. Hans Keller had been part of that system, trained to rely on distance and control. He had fought in earlier battles where the Tiger's presence alone could change outcomes. Enemy tanks destroyed before they even knew what hit them. That was the expectation. But by 1945, those conditions were gone. The Eastern Front had become a different kind of battlefield. Larger Soviet formations, better coordination, new equipment. The IS-2 was part of that shift. It was not meant to replace the T-34, but to support breakthroughs, to engage heavy targets, to challenge tanks like the Tiger on more equal terms. And it did. Back in that frozen field near the Oder, the aftermath of the shot was immediate. Smoke filled the interior of the Tiger. Systems failed. The crew struggled to understand what had happened. The world inside the tank had changed in an instant. Outside, the IS-2 held its position. The Soviet crew would not rush forward immediately. They knew the danger. Even a damaged Tiger could still fire. They waited, watching for movement, for any sign of return fire. But the Tiger did not fire. The turret remained locked. The gun, now damaged, could not respond. The advantage had shifted completely. You can almost feel the stillness that follows, the kind that comes after a sudden, violent moment. Both sides waiting, but only one side still capable of acting. For the Soviet crew, this was confirmation. The threat was neutralized. Another heavy German tank destroyed. Another step forward in a war that was now moving toward its final phase. For the German crew, it was the end of a fight they had not expected to lose this way, not because of tactics, not because of positioning, but because of a failure at the worst possible time. Mechanical reliability is rarely discussed in dramatic terms, but in armored warfare, it is everything. A tank is not just a gun and armor, it is a system. Every part must work under stress, under fire, in extreme conditions. And when one part fails, it can take everything else with it. The Tiger one was powerful, but it was also complex, heavy, demanding. It required maintenance, care, and conditions that were becoming harder to maintain as the war dragged on. Fuel shortages, spare parts, overworked crews, all of it added up. The IS-2, while not perfect, was built with a different approach. Simpler in some ways, focused on impact rather than precision. And in moments like this, that difference mattered. Hans Keller's experience in that final engagement reflects a larger reality. By 1945, the balance had shifted. German tanks were still dangerous, still capable, but they were no longer dominant. The Soviet forces had adapted, improved, and learned how to counter them. And sometimes all it took was a single moment, a turret that would not turn, a gun that could not align, a second lost at the wrong time. You can almost stand there in that frozen field, feeling the cold air, hearing the distant echoes of battle, and understanding how quickly everything can change. One moment you are in control, the next you are reacting. And then, if luck is not on your side, it is over. But what makes this moment even more powerful is what led to that mechanical failure in the first place. Because tanks do not simply stop working without a reason. In the final months of the war, German armored units were operating under constant pressure, retreating, repositioning, engaging again and again with little time for full maintenance. The Tiger one, for all its strength, required careful upkeep. Its turret system relied on a powered traverse connected to the engine, along with manual backup controls. If the engine output dropped, or if debris entered the mechanism, or if internal components wore down, the turret could slow or even lock completely. You can almost imagine what had happened before this encounter. Days of movement, cold starts in freezing weather, dust and debris working their way into gears and bearings, the crew doing what they could with limited tools and limited time. Each small issue ignored because the battle demanded immediate action, until one of those issues finally became critical. Inside the Tiger, in those final seconds before the shot, the crew was not just fighting the enemy, they were fighting their own machine. And on the other side, the IS-2 represented a different kind of thinking. It was not as refined in optics or rate of fire, but it was built to deliver heavy impact with fewer moving complexities. Its gun was slower to reload, yes, but when it fired, it did not need a second chance at close range. The 122mm shell carried enormous explosive force. Even near misses could damage tracks, optics, or external equipment. Direct hits were often decisive. The Soviet crew knew this. Their training emphasized closing distance when necessary, using terrain, numbers, and timing. By 1945, they were no longer the inexperienced force of earlier years. They had learned, adapted, and improved their coordination. Back in that frozen field after the first shot, there was no immediate second round. The IS-2 crew would have begun the reloading process, heavy and deliberate, but they did not need to rush. The result was already clear. Inside the Tiger, the situation had gone beyond recovery. Systems were failing. Visibility was gone. The structure that once felt like protection now felt like a trap. The crew's training told them what this meant. When a tank can no longer fight, survival depends on decisions made in seconds. Outside, the battlefield remained tense. Other units were likely nearby. Artillery could strike at any moment. Infantry could appear from tree lines. Tank battles rarely happened in isolation. They were part of a larger, constantly shifting fight. You can almost zoom out from this single moment and see the wider picture. The Oder River line was one of the last major defensive barriers before Berlin. German forces were trying to hold, delay, and disrupt the Soviet advance. Every tank, every crew, every position mattered. But the pressure was overwhelming. Soviet forces were advancing with momentum, large numbers of tanks, supported by infantry and artillery, pushing forward despite losses. The IS-2 units were often used to break through the hardest points, to face the heaviest German armor directly. And that is exactly what happened here. This was not just a random encounter. It was part of a larger pattern. Heavy tank against heavy tank. Old confidence meeting new reality. Hans Keller and his crew were experienced. They had survived previous battles. They understood their machine. They trusted it. But war is not static. It changes. And sometimes it changes faster than people expect. The Tiger one was still dangerous. In the right conditions, with a functioning system and proper positioning, it could still dominate. But those conditions were becoming rare. The battlefield was no longer giving it the space and time it needed. And the IS-2 was built for exactly this kind of fight. Close, direct, decisive. You can almost feel the weight of that realization, not just for the crew in that moment, but for the entire armored force they were part of. The understanding that the balance had shifted, that the rules they had relied on were no longer enough. The frozen ground, the mist, the silence after the shot. All of it becomes part of a larger story. A story about machines, yes, but more importantly, about adaptation, about how quickly advantage can disappear. Because in the end, it was not just the IS-2's gun that decided this fight. It was timing. It was reliability. It was the ability to act in the critical second when the other side could not. A turret that refused to move. A hull that turned just a little too slowly. A gun that was almost on target. And a 122mm shell that arrived first. That is how battles are decided. That is how moments become outcomes. And that is why, on that cold February morning in 1945 near the Oder River, the Tiger one lost a fight it was never meant to lose.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.